Hello everyone. This is the second video where I am continuing with the selection and evolution topic, and just revising. The last topic which we covered in the previous video ended with the Hardy-Weinberg law, and we talked about how Hardy-Weinberg law had a simple sequence of P plus Q equal to 1, which each of them I had mentioned are the frequencies which we are talking about. And then first it was allele frequency. Post that, we started to introduce the frequency of individuals found in a particular population. However, for the Hardy-Weinberg law, there are certain things which have to be kept in mind, and that is, it does not apply during selection pressure when only one particular genotype has the selection pressure. Does not work when there is non-random mating, when there's a lot of migration of individuals. So there are certain places where the Hardy-Weinberg law will not work, and these are the three main characteristics. Questions related to this have come in, asking under what conditions as a one marker, asking and mentioning that under what condition does this law not work. So these are the 3 pointers. When we had started with the study of selection and we had started with natural selection, the main topics which we had talked about was random mating, independent assortment, mutation as the topics coming up. So something which is kind of opposite to that does not work when we are trying to make the Hardy-Weinberg law. That's why things like non-random mating come into play. Moving from natural selection to artificial selection, as we are dealing with the chapter of selection and evolution, we come to the two types of selection. First was natural, and the second one is artificial selection. Artificial selection is something we are doing as individuals. So the selections of organisms or a particular trait by the humans is what comes under artificial selection. The questions related to artificial selection usually range from about 2 to 4 marker, asking about how the process of artificial selection is done. There are basically a set of steps which have to be followed for this entire process. The population used for artificial selection must have the variation. So for example, if I as a researcher am trying to find out a particular trait which has to be selected, variation has to be there in my population. Once I find out that my population has individuals who have variation, I select the individual with the desired characteristic. That's the second point here. This is followed by finding another parent with a similar characteristic so that I can breed. Now, why do I need to breed? Because in case there are some of them which are heterozygous, I need to remove the ones which I don't need. I need to have a pure line of the trait I am trying to select during the study I am performing. The two of them are bred together. The offspring which is produced is then tested. So the ones which have the desired characteristic are stored again and again and again. We do multiple breedings so that we have a line of individuals who are pure for that particular trait. As I mentioned, the process continues for multiple generations. A few examples of artificial selection which have been taught to the students for a very long time is wheat resistant against fungal diseases. So here most of the wheat, just to remind, Triticum aestivum is the scientific name of wheat, and what has to be remembered is that what has to be remembered in this process is that some of the wheat plants are resistant to the fungal diseases. We pick up those plants and we try and breed them. Similarly for rice, which are resistant to bacterial diseases, maize for longer height or better height so that the grain which is produced in maize, also the grain size at times is looked at a characteristic for the process of artificial selection. This was all about plants. Now, when we move on to animals, this is about improving the milk yield in the cattle, and for this, we are trying to start by selecting the cattle which are giving us a good milk yield and trying to breed them with the ones which have a higher yield of milk. So, here also artificial selection can be done at the animal level. So, the important terms which are related to selection and evolution, one of the most common ones are inbreeding depression. And when we are talking about inbreeding is when two closely related individuals, or where they are very closely related individuals breeding with each other, and this leads to the condition of inbreeding depression. Inbreeding depression refers to the loss of ability to grow well because of breeding between closely related individuals. Basically, we have closely related individuals breeding with each other, and as a result of that, they are not able to grow well. We have known from our previous studies that inbreeding does leads to more diseases. In fact, there is less variation which occurs because of this inbreeding. So, as you can see clearly in the slide, I've pointed out that the harmful alleles because of inbreeding eventually come together. Outbreeding, which is opposite of inbreeding, is when there is crossing or reproduction or breeding which is occurring between not that closely related individuals, and this applies to both plant as well as animals. As a result of that, certain genes are expressed in a completely different combination, which leads to the term hybrid vigor. When I'm talking about hybrid vigor, it refers to increased ability to survive because you have a lot of variation that come into place. So, repeating myself, inbreeding might be very easy to happen because the individuals are very closely placed to each other, so breeding can easily happen. However, it will have diseases and everything come into place because a lot of recessive phenotypes which were not there are being expressed. However, when we are talking about outbreeding, we are talking about new kind of traits which are being formed because we have not so closely related individuals but different um variety of individuals coming together under the same species, as a result of which, so hybrid vigor, outbreeding, and inbreeding depression are the three important terms here. The next topic which we come after selection here is evolution. Evolution is when a particular species or a particular set of individuals in a particular area undergo the change. And when I'm talking about the change that they are undergoing, it takes about millions of years. So, evolution does not occur over a span of 1 year or 2 years. Here, this is one of the most prominent processes which can lead to formation of new species. So, there might be a mutation. As a result of that mutation, certain set of species start to separate out from the main population. Over a long span of time, it might lead to development of a new species, and that's what we are talking about in evolution. Obviously, by simple words, now if a question is coming to us about what is evolution, what are the reasons of the evolution, so mutation is one of the most common reason for evolution. What does it lead to? Please remember, when you're answering these questions, you need to be using certain key terms, and one of them is allele frequency. It's very easy for us to write that the changes which are happening might lead to uh, a different number of individuals, or the main individual might separate out from the main population. But the preferable answer is using the key terms which relate much more better to answering a scientific question here. The next topic which comes under evolution is the types of speciation. So, speciation is the process of formation of new species. And when I'm having new species form, there can be multiple reasons behind that. Depending upon the kind of reason it is there, it decides on the kind of speciation it is. So, the basic start of speciation or the new species which occur is when there is inability to interbreed, as a result of which outbreeding will start, variation will come into place. So, when we are talking about interbreeding, we are talking about trying to differentiate this term from inbreeding and outbreeding. Okay, so I have two individuals which are not able to breed with each other, is what they are talking about here when I'm saying inability to interbreed. Okay, so they are not recognizing, so there are many reasons for it. Some of them I've listed them below. There might be a physical barrier, quite common, inability of the gametes to fuse, the zygote to divide, as a result of which a non viable or a sterile offspring has been formed, not recognizing mates or mating behavior. So there might be inability that in the same population it is difficult to recognize the mate with which the breeding has to occur. Just to remember, I've listed all of them. You might have a question coming in asking maximum of about 3 here, and it won't be that difficult to explain the entire process. The next slide, we talk about the process of speciation. So there are two types of them. The first one is allopatric. Allopatric refers to when there is geographical isolation or there's a physical barrier which comes between two species, as a result of which the two species breed separately because of the physical barrier. So let's say in a particular area I have a population of rabbits. Due to, let's say, an earthquake or due to changes in land movement, the entire island or the area where they are living, a crack develops between this place, as a result of which the two areas are kind of separated. Even though they were able to interbreed with each other, but because of this big crack or let's say a creek kind of thing which has been formed in this area, they are not able to move from one part to another. They breed independently of the other. This might lead to what we are trying to say, creation of a new species. But please mind it that when I'm talking about creation of new species, it's not occurring in 2 years or 3 years, as I mentioned. It is a long process. The second type of speciation is when there is no physical barrier. Okay, and then even though there is no physical barrier, it is just reproductive isolation which is occurring. So as we mentioned in the previous slide about lack of interbreeding which is occurring, so lack of interbreeding without physical barrier can be an inability to recognize the mates, the zygote not surviving, the gametes not fusing. So we refer to this as reproductive isolation. There is reproductive isolation but not geographical isolation. However, in allopatric there is geographical isolation. So till now, if we look at trying to answer a question which has come up with respect to evolution, you should always try to use these terms I have listed while answering the questions which have been given. As I said, whenever we are answering the questions for either paper 4, paper 5, we always try and think on lines of forming a sentence which is easier. So two set of populations in a particular area get separated and can form new species because they cannot mate with each other. But a more scientific term to use in that case is reproductive isolation. They might be separated from each other. Instead of that, geographical isolation works much more better. Ecological separation and behavioral separation are two new terms which come to exist after we've talked about speciation. So when I'm talking about ecological separation, there are certain ecological factors which are controlling the growth of a particular species, even though they might be next to each other. One of the very common example which is found in most of the books for A levels are the soils affecting plant growth at different points. So at a particular season, or let's say at a particular time of the day, or a particular set of months in a year, the soil has a different pH, and that pH changes over the next set of months. Because of these changes, there are different points at which the growth of plants is affected. Coming to the next one, which is behavioral separation, they might be belonging to the same set of species, and the best example is that of fishes. Same set of fishes, some of them go much more below while they are swimming, while some of them remain on the surface, even though they are belonging to the same set, because they have been separated due to their behavior of living in a certain area. This is where behavioral separation comes in. So I'm coming back again. Evolution, we talk about allopatric speciation, sympatric speciation. It relates to a number of terms such as reproductive isolation, geographical isolation, ecological separation, and behavioral separation. I'm reiterating the fact that whenever you're trying to answer the questions related to the same, please make sure that most of these at this particular point of time are used when you're trying to answer the questions. The last topic, which comes under the selection and evolution, is evolutionary relationship establishment data. So this is a very common diagram which is found in most of the books and has been existent for a very long time. What we are trying to understand here is that how are multiple species related, and how one species could have given rise to another because of a particular type of speciation which is occurring. How do we know that the two species are related to other? So the two species which are visible in a particular area, we assume that they are related to each other. So the thing that works the best in this is the molecular evidence. And when I'm talking about the molecular evidence here, we are talking about DNA sequencing, how much similarity is there in their DNA sequences, how much similarity is in the kind of proteins which are found, and that's where the analysis is done. The family trees which are based or made are based on this evidence of the molecular evidence about DNA and about how the entire analysis is there. So if you look at this diagram which is there on the right, we can clearly say that the species Agama and Camellia are more related to each other as compared to if I try and do an Agama and an Oplurus. These two are more related to each other as compared to Agama and Oplurus. So it is very easy to kind of read these diagrams and be able to answer to them. It's very important that when we are doing this chapter of selection and evolution, it's quite theoretical. You move very fast when you are doing a lot of self-study, but what you need to take care when you are dealing with this particular topic is the ability to use those key terms to answer your questions rather than using your normal language, or rather than using just simple words which could be made into sentences. Because what we have been looking, and Cambridge has been very particular about, is that during your A levels, try and use as many as scientific terms when you're trying to answer the question. So go through the video, go through if you have any of the questions which are there, and please feel free to post against the video and I'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much. See you again with my next video.